Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Let's Eat. I'm so happy that you're here today. So thank you for being here. Let us let us waste no time here. I want to set the scene a little bit and be completely transparent. And I honestly may have mentioned this in last week's episode and maybe even the week before. I have been struggling so much in the podcast department. I can't tell you how many times, and I whether it was to record last week's episode or to record this week's episode, I don't remember how many times I've actually physically sat down at my desk to record the episode and nothing comes to my mind. I don't even know what I want to talk about. If I decide I want to talk about it, I just feel like I don't really like this topic. And I may have mentioned this, or this could have been in the intros, the 6 intros that I recorded over the last couple days trying to record for the episode. I feel like I need to get some guests. Get some guests here. I think I need to like re-inspire. And truthfully, who would have thought I would be in a shortage of something to say? That's truthfully just shocking to me because of the obvious reasons, right? I like to talk, and the podcast is usually a space where I can just talk and talk and talk, sometimes overtime a bit, and I usually don't have an issue. And for whatever reason, I am just feeling so mentally blocked. I'm in such a writer's block. And it's not just in the podcasting department, it is also in the content department, it is in the teaching department. This weekend, I think I overcame my teaching block. I was feeling really good about my classes on Saturday, and then I taught a pop up class on Sunday. So I was feeling good, and so I think I may have overcome that. So hopefully we are out of the woods here or making our way out of the woods, but this has been tough. So going into the fall, I am manifesting new energy. I'm manifesting really great guests to have on the show. I know you would love that. And we're just manifesting just like a recalibration or like a restoration of my podcasting energy because I don't know. We're struggling a bit here, but persevering nonetheless. Okay, you know how I feel about getting an episode out to you, and so we are doing that. And I'm excited to dive into today's topic. So, thank you so much for being here. On that note, welcome back to the table and let's eat. Welcome to Let's Eat. I'm your host, Emily, certified holistic health coach, functional nutrition expert, and self proclaimed wellness enthusiast, here to meet you at the intersection of physical and mental health, the space within which we become well. This podcast is meant to explore all areas of mind and body wellness, designed to offer you the integrative knowledge, behavioral strategies, and mindset shifts necessary to uplevel your health and feel better today. We'll explore nutrition, sleep, movement, self-care and stress management, habits and routines, self-development, gut health, mental health, and more. I'm so happy that you're here. Welcome to the table. Let's eat. So, as we move into the fall, I'm going to try my hardest to be more intentional about theming my days. And so, for those of you who do not know what that means, it's basically, as a business owner with all of the hats that I wear, trying to be sure I am setting myself up in a way that is most productive and most aligned with, kind of my groove, but also, for example, reserving certain days for client working facing days, especially now that I have the whole week. When I was working at the restaurant and I didn't have Thursdays and Fridays to devote to work, I had to obviously just condense all of my sessions into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I would, reluctantly have clients Thursday and Friday just based on the need to accommodate. But I'm going to really try my hardest moving into September. And I may have mentioned this on maybe the family dinner episode, when I'm down the shore, starting to really kind of brainstorm, especially just moving into 2027, how to be really solid in those boundaries and to just be really intentional about only scheduling clients on certain days. It feels so good waking up, and I love seeing clients, but it feels really good to have full days where I'm not seeing clients because it just helps my brain. And then I can get into the headspace of creative work, into administrative work, and like trying to keep that boundary. And it's not going to always work out, right? There's going to be times where I have to kind of push that boundary based on scheduling and availability and whatnot. But that is what I'm planning on doing. So with all of that said, Monday mornings I try and push my clients to mid-morning into the afternoon instead of seeing clients first thing. So Monday mornings are going to be my record your episode day because I release it on Tuesday. So if I can make it work another time during the week, yes, absolutely, I'll do that. But for the sake of what I'm planning on doing, it will be Monday mornings will be my let's get up and record a podcast episode because I do my best recordings first thing in the morning. So that is what we're doing today. It is Monday morning. And today we're going to be talking about the thyroid. The thyroid, the thyroid, the thyroid. And the reason that we're going to do that is because I think this is one of the most under-recognized areas of health. It is so, this is the problem. It is so, I don't want to say it's under-discussed because that might not be totally true, but it's under-considered. And I think the biggest issue is the thyroid's relationship with the gut, with the liver, with the adrenal glands, like the connectedness that it has to the other areas of the body that I think modern endocrinology is not considering. And then also how underdiagnosed people are with thyroid issues, and how what I've seen in my work is individuals are not being supported until they meet a certain threshold, which I can understand. If diagnostically there's nothing to be diagnosed, then per healthcare training, it isn't a problem. We'll just watch it, quote unquote. But I think a lot of these issues could be intercepted, especially when there are symptoms. That I think is the problem, is if you're showing signs of subclinical dysfunction and, per lab work, and then you're also symptomatic, does that not warrant at least some proactive intervention so that it doesn't continue to progress in the direction that it is appearing to be heading, especially when you have years of lab work behind you to suggest that it's unfolding. Like, oh, your TSH looked at X in 2018, and then in 2019 it increased, and then in 2020 and things kind of progress in a way that you can maybe hypothesize that dysfunction might be brewing. So that is what we're going to dive into today. Forgive me already preemptively because I'm probably going to be all over the board with this, but what I really want to shed light on is the role of the thyroid, the connection that it has with all the other systems in the body, and why it's really important to, especially when it comes to lab work, like certain lab data really help to bolster our understanding of the thyroid better, right? Like looking at your lipid panel, looking at your iron panel, like looking at all these other markers that help to really kind of give us a clear view of how is the whole body operating, because the thyroid has such an important part in the body's functioning. I mean, it's huge. It's hugely important. And then also discussing what I'm seeing in labs and what I'm seeing in my work, and how common hypothyroidism or symptoms that resemble hypothyroidism is, and Hashimoto's, and that whole topic of conversation. So we've got lots to cover today. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the thyroid and let's explore this together. So, the thyroid. Let's talk about the thyroid. Let's meet the thyroid. So, the thyroid's a butterfly-shaped gland, and it's a part of our endocrine system, and it secretes hormones that affect our mood, our skin, our hair, most notably our metabolism, our body temperature, all sorts of different things. And there's a feedback loop that works with the pituitary gland, which is also part of the endocrine system, and the hypothalamus that's located in the brain. So some people are familiar with the HPA axis, so the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This is the HPT axis, which is the hypothalamus pituitary thyroid. So, as I said, the thyroid and pituitary gland work together in a loop. And when thyroid hormones are low, which every system in the body has a receptor site for thyroid hormone. So we have to be aware of how system-wide, how systemic of a role the thyroid and thyroid hormones play. So the brain is then going to produce thyrotropin, or TRH, and that signals to our pituitary gland, so the hypothalamus to the pituitary, that the TRH stimulates production of TSH from the pituitary gland. So you might be familiar with TSH being a marker that would be usually included, right? TSH is usually what's included when it comes to testing the thyroid. That is just one of many pieces to the puzzle, which we'll get into. But the pituitary gland releases TSH, and then that activates the thyroid to produce thyroxine, which is also known as T4. I'm going to refer to that as T4. Now, T4 is then converted to T3, which is the more active thyroid hormone. And this is key here, okay? T4 is converted into T3 in a variety of different locations, including the liver and the gut. This is important. This is super, super important because we know, well, my body could be producing T4, but is it adequately converting? Is it adequately converting to T3? So this conversion happens in the brain. 60% of it happens in the liver. Important point there. The kidney, the gut, and that is what ideally would happen so that T3 can then be utilized by the body wherever it needs to be utilized in a way that it is meant to be used, and all is well, and the body is functioning and, is a well-oiled machine, we'll call it. So I want to read this slide from the course, one of the courses that I've gone through. I am just in my in my notes here, just pulling out some of the most valuable information and being able to kind of summarize it, because there's tons of information that I have, but I want to be sure I'm concise and I'm giving you the good stuff. So let's talk about the thyroid and mitochondria connection. So if you remember from 7th grade biology, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Okay. I don't know about you, but in my 7th grade, was it 7th grade? Yeah. Was it 7th grade? It was either in middle school or high school. No, I'm pretty sure it was in middle school. I remember it's so funny because my sister is a few years older than I. So whenever, she would go through she went through her middle school years, I always was able to see what she was doing, and then I would anticipate that for me in the future. Mr. Lembo, he was our 7th grade science teacher, and I'd have to double check with her because I want to be sure I'm not that it matters, but I'm almost positive. I'll have to text her, but I'm almost positive. We did a cell cake. So we basically had to make a cake that showed the cell, and we'd have the mitochondria, we had the nucleus. You have all these terms that like just immediately brings you back to 7th grade biology. And so here we are talking about it many, many years later. So anyways, the thyroid, so the mitochondria is what is important for cellular energy production, right? So the mitochondria is huge, powerhouse of the cell. I love using the word powerhouse. I say it a lot, but the powerhouse of the cell, meaning on a cellular level, all the cells in our body, this is the powerhouse. This is what creates energy. So you can imagine how important that is for whole body health. So anyways, enough about this. Actually, not enough about this, but let's get to it. Okay. The thyroid produces the hormones that activate mitochondria in every cell of the body. All cells have to be activated by thyroid to function. All cells have to be activated by thyroid to function. If brain mitochondria aren't activated, the brain doesn't work as well. If heart mitochondria aren't activated, heart doesn't work as well. If liver mitochondria aren't activated, the liver doesn't work as well. The liver is also what metabolizes adrenal hormones, estrogen, progesterone, the thyroid hormone, so it needs to be working as best as it can. Not to mention, the thyroid is responsible for 60% of that hormone conversion. Not the thyroid, the liver. The liver is responsible for 60% of that thyroid conversion. So, If there's anything, let me just put this as like a broad statement. If there's anything that you take away from Let's Eat and what I share about on Let's Eat, it's that the thyroid, holy cow, the liver is so important. It is involved in over 500, processes, we'll call it, in the body. Why are we not talking about the liver more? The liver, in my personal interpretation or observation of our healthcare, the liver is looked at for: are you drinking too much? Are your liver's enzymes elevated, right? Which is very common in blood work. And do you have fatty liver? Whether it's alcoholic induced fatty liver or non alcoholic induced fatty liver, which is largely due to fructose and sugar and whatnot. And that ties into metabolic dysfunction. But that's the only time we're talking about the liver. We're not talking about the liver as it relates to bile. We're not talking about the liver as it relates to cholesterol. We're not talking about the liver as it relates to toxins and a hormone metabolism and estrogen dominance and all of these things. I mean, go back. I'll link the episode in the show notes. This was probably back in the summer. Am I okay? Am I okay? It is the summer, Emily. It was not back in the summer. It is the summer right now. I don't know when this was. Maybe the spring. I'd have to go look. But I had a whole episode on the liver, which probably didn't even scratch the surface on its importance. So I probably have to do a part 2 on that to really just drive the point home. But the liver is so important. Anyways, if thyroid function drops 10%, every other tissue function in your body also drops 10%. It isn't until your thyroid drops to 70 to 75% that you can then detect a problem on a blood test. Are we serious? This is crazy. Okay, let's read this again. If thyroid function drops 10%, every other tissue function in your body also drops 10%. It isn't until your thyroid drops to 70 or 75%, 70 to 75%, that you can then detect a problem on a blood test. If this does not illustrate, if this does not emphasize how incredibly important the thyroid is, I truly do not know what else I have to say to you. Really. I really don't. And the problem is, this is the catch here. It isn't until your thyroid drops to 70 to 75% that you can then detect a problem on a blood test. This is if the appropriate and necessary blood tests are being run. Okay, so it isn't until your thyroid drops to 70 to 75% that you can detect a problem on a blood test. And this is expecting that the appropriate labs are being run in order to detect said problem. And this is what we're going to get into: is the appropriate labs are not being run. They're not being run. That is, unless you run them with me, of course, because I refuse to to settle for just a TSH marker and not see anything else. So this is this is this is earth shattering. Okay, this is really big. So I want you to let that be what sets the scene for you, what sets the stage for you around this concept of the thyroid. And this is for anyone listening who is dealing with any level of thyroid issue or thyroid dysfunction, underactive thyroid, have been diagnosed underactive thyroid, hypothyroid, have been diagnosed Hashimoto's. This is for anyone who is suspicious of thyroid issues. This is for anyone. This is for anyone. This is truly for anyone, because you could be dealing with it. And it's not to say that you have to get kind of caught up in your brain around like, oh, well, I need to overthink this now because maybe I do have problems and I don't know it. It's not, that's not meant to, that's not the intention here. But the intention is meant to inform you and educate you so that you can seek out the necessary support if you are suspicious of an issue in your thyroid function, or if you're currently dealing with thyroid function. I just got off a call. No, I did not just get off a call, but last week I had a call with a client of mine. She and I ran labs in January, and we have been working on addressing a few different things in what we saw on her panel. And she's been diagnosed Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune of the thyroid, since she was, I think, in her teens, like since she was very young. And since then, she had been medicated, but never was given any real intervention outside of just, okay, here's levothyroxine, which is like the standard medication that is offered for Hashimoto's. And she's now in her early 30s. And I asked her, I said, had you ever gotten your free T3 measured? Have you ever gotten any of these other markers measured? And she's like, no, not until you had them ordered. And it's just like, it's so disappointing. And I try to be really understanding because to me, it's like, okay, well, there must be a reason. There must be a reason why this is the case. There must be a reason why it's not measured. And I'd love for anyone out there, endocrinologists, if you're listening, I don't think that I have any endocrinologists listening, but I would love to just understand better why. Because I understand if it's a primary care doctor, they might not be, might not be the one to order it, but endocrinologists are not ordering these labs. And guess what? $62 is what it cost me to order this panel for clients. So what do you there like what? What? There's no excuses. There's literally no excuses. So another influence that I think is really important, I know I just went off a little bit there. So we're reining it back in. Okay, like I said, this is going to be all over the board, so just bear with me here. The influence of our adrenal glands and cortisol, our body's main stress hormone, which, I talk about cortisol a lot. I see this a ton in labs. Cortisol can decrease TSH. So when you think about it, and I probably should have been more clear on this, TSH is kind of like sounding the alarm to the thyroid because it's something that's released by the brain. Okay, so we're measuring TSH, but it's not even really directly a measurement of the thyroid. But that's another story. TSH is produced to signal to the thyroid, hey, we need more thyroid hormone. And so when TSH is suppressed, just imagine that sound gets quieter. So cortisol decreases TSH, which is going to lower our thyroid hormone production. So high TSH is usually indicative of underactive thyroid, right? Because if the TSH is getting louder, if it's getting higher, that means that the thyroid is not producing enough thyroid hormone, because that's why TSH is getting louder. It's a signal from the brain to tell the thyroid, hey, hello, you there? We need more thyroid hormone, which is why underactivity of the thyroid is the problem, because the thyroid is not producing. So TSH gets louder and louder, which is why we see TSH increase. Cortisol is going to decrease TSH, which is then going to lower thyroid hormone production, because if TSH gets lower, usually seen in hyperthyroidism, which is not as common as hypo, but if we see the TSH get lower, that's usually an indicator there's plenty of thyroid hormone, we don't need any more, but that could just easily be cortisol having an impact there. So cortisol is going to inhibit the conversion of T4 to active T3. So one of the most important interventions when it comes to addressing the thyroid is reducing stress. And that I feel like is like such a what does that even mean? I mean, how many times it's like, oh, stress management or self-care and I just feel like until we really take a closer look at how our culture has conditioned us to believe that the way of life we live right now is normal, that is what I was thinking about yesterday. The only way that we can actually change our health, and I don't want to make it so general, I don't think that that's totally the case. Obviously, there's a lot we can do with with nutrition and with movement and all that. But until we actually take a real cold hard look at, I am living my life in a way that has been culturally normalized. But does that mean my biology and physiology are also able to thrive in this environment? No. So that's something I want you to consider. We have evolved as a species to function in a way where we are doing 100 things at once. I mean, technology plays a role in this. There's expectations by society, obviously, economically. Sometimes it does require us to work many jobs, all of these things that really kind of flesh out what it means to be a human, a female, a man in 2026, right? But does that mean that this is aligned with how our biology and physiology will optimally function? No. And there's dissonance there. There's a discrepancy there. So I want you to really kind of consider this is just because your norm is waking up at 4 a.m. getting to the gym to do your workout, working a 9 to 5, coming home, getting dinner, getting the kids ready for bed, doing all the things, and then getting to bed at 10, 11 o'clock, and then getting up and doing the same thing again. That might be your norm. And I give you a lot of credit if you are that person, because I know that's the reality of so many people. I imagine that my life one day is also going to include something similar to that. However, what we have to be really honest with ourselves about is this aligned with what's best for my biology and physiology and health? No, it's not. It's not. And it's not to say that you have to now suddenly abandon ship on that, like disown your children, quit your job. No, definitely not the case. But what I am suggesting is that you have to be honest with yourself around, okay, how can I still manage all of these things while also setting boundaries and taking time for myself and eliminating the stressors that are in my control? That's a huge thing for the sake of adrenal function, but also obviously, as we're talking about today, for the sake of thyroid function. So, we'll briefly talk about hyperthyroidism, but I want to talk about hypothyroidism because this is the most important, I think, the most important message that I want to put out there around how commonly you know what? I retract that. It's not commonly diagnosed because a lot of women are walking around with subclinical hypothyroidism and they're not being supported the way that they should. So, hypothyroidism, whether it's diagnosed or not, looks like hair loss, the body is always cold, you're gaining weight or there's weight loss resistance. That I think is probably the primary thing. I would say weight loss resistance and constipation, two of the most common symptoms, we'll call it. Dealing with anxiety and panic attacks, nails break easily, headaches, skin is dry or itchy, your joints hurt, your menstrual cycle is unwell. Chris Kesser, he is a pretty well-known person in the health space. He says what the vast majority of hypothyroidism patients need to understand is that they don't have a problem with their thyroid, they have a problem with their immune system attacking the thyroid. The liver and stress also play massive roles. So, the reality here is hypothyroidism can also be looked at as a symptom. Okay, so underactivity of the thyroid can be looked at as a symptom. And what I mean by that is 90% of hypothyroidism is caused by Hashimoto's. Now, the distinction here is massive. Okay, the distinction here is massive because what we're looking at as far as like the difference between the two is hypothyroidism is underactivity of the thyroid. So the thyroid is just not functioning as well as it could. It is underactive, but it's possibly still intact. Versus Hashimoto's, which means the immune system is directing an attack on thyroid tissue, which is damaging the thyroid's ability to produce thyroid hormone. So, why is this significant? Well, it's significant because, at least with Hashimoto's, upon its detection, we can work on intercepting the immune system and prevent it from, or slow it down, not prevent it per se, but slow it down from causing the attack on the thyroid, which is inducing the state of hypothyroidism. But if we are not screening for Hashimoto's, do you see why this is a problem? Okay, I said before, TSH is what is commonly measured for looking at the thyroid, which if we look at that, realistically looking at TSH isn't isn't going to show us a whole bunch. I mean, yes, it might tell us if there's an elevated TSH that there's something wrong here, but why are we not fleshing out the thyroid panel as comprehensively to understand all the markers that go along with it, which I'll share with you at the end of the episode what markers I want you to recommend or what I want you to request when you're going into test as a woman as a whole. As a whole, you should be getting these measured. So, the problem here is if we're not screening for Hashimoto's and we're not looking at it and it's 90%, some even say 95% of hypothyroidism is caused by Hashimoto's, Hashimoto's is going undetected or undiagnosed, the immune system continues to exert its attack on the thyroid tissue, further damage is caused, and we could have intercepted or intervened prior to it becoming more and more of an issue. I had a client of mine who, I forget exactly what it was, but she had sent me her labs. This was last fall. And I forget what exactly was shown, but her endocrine, I think it was her primary, I think it was her primary, basically said to her, you're showing signs of Hashimoto's, autoimmune activity, and eventually this will turn into hypothyroidism. So we'll just monitor it. You're going to eventually be on a medication for it, but there's nothing you can do. And I just like, what? What? And don't get me wrong, especially if you're in the healthcare profession, maybe you're listening and you might feel similarly. I think autoimmune is a very controversial topic in the healthcare world, and I don't want to come across as though I know more than somebody who is medically trained. However, we have to understand why the immune system is exerting the attack on whatever tissue, organ, system, whatever it is. And we can do that by looking at a stool analysis, by removing inflammatory foods, right? Like, we can clarify maybe why the immune system is operating the way that it is. The body is intelligent. It should not be operating in this way. This is a malfunctioning system. So we have the capability to look deeper and explore, okay, why is the body responding this way? Why is the immune system operating this way? And it's important that we're taking that into consideration when it comes to looking at autoimmune, and obviously in this case Hashimoto's. You can identify the trigger. So that is huge. You can look at the gut, leaky gut, huge piece to the autoimmune picture. Anyways, I just did not like that feedback. I think that that's a really unfortunate statement to make, saying that, we just have to monitor it, and then eventually you're going to be on medication, and that's going to be that. It's like, no, there's actually more lifestyle intervention that can go into it, but you're right. You're right. You're totally right. So when it comes to the drivers of hypothyroidism, let me just rattle off a few of the most common, okay? And this, I'm gonna obviously stick with Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism. I don't want to not also talk about hyperthyroidism, but I feel like this is most commonly the issue is underactive thyroid activity. So I want to kind of shed light on the most common reasons that don't necessarily include a thyroid like, it's not like about the thyroid. It's less about, like, Hashimoto's is not a thyroid problem. Hashimoto's is immune system problem. So why don't we look at what is being influenced, or what rather is the thyroid being influenced by, that is creating an environment where it's not functioning well? And instead of just saying, here's T4 and you're on your way, why don't we look deeper and look at all of the influences that may be playing a role here? All right. So like I mentioned, stress and adrenal issues, chronic stress, to kind of explain it simply, promotes the release of inflammatory cytokines, which reduce the function of the hypothalamus and pituitary gland and inhibits the conversion of thyroid hormone, causing that thyroid hormone resistance. Hashimoto's, as I mentioned, the immune system is attacking the thyroid and produces thyroid antibodies. That's something you should always get tested. This is going to progressively, over time, destroy the thyroid tissue, which is going to then create damage to the thyroid, preventing it from, adequately producing the thyroid hormone. That's why T4 levothyroxine is something that is commonly prescribed, because it's basically supplying the body with that T4. Now, the key here is it actually converting, right? Is that T4 being converted into T3, which we talked about before? Toxins. The thyroid is usually one of the first areas of the body to be affected by toxins. There's that kind of saying, the canary in the coal mine. Whenever this was, miners would send a canary into the coal mine to see if there was high levels of toxins, I guess it was, and if the canary died, then you knew that, okay, this is not a good spot to be, because the canary was most sensitive, I guess, or just because the canary was so small, or I don't know what it was. But anyways, that was their way of kind of determining the level of toxin exposure for their own safety. And so this is kind of what the thyroid is looked at as, the thyroid is like the most sensitive. So especially as fit women, we put on tons of different chemicals every day. Think about where you apply your perfume is right on your neck. Okay, that's a direct direct hit on the thyroid. So toxins like chemicals, metals, herbicides, pesticides, chronic toxicity of aluminum, lead, mercury can damage the thyroid by recruiting antibodies to attack the thyroid. So definitely important to be considerate of your toxic load, especially alongside the liver and the role of the liver and how important the liver is in relation to the thyroid. That's a lot of liver burden as well. So it's not only a direct impact on our endocrine system, but it's also a direct impact on the liver. Other issues like blood sugar issues, insulin resistance can increase the destruction of the thyroid. Low blood sugar can damage the thyroid by suppressing pituitary gland function. Nutrient deficiencies. This one is really big. The thyroid needs specific nutrients for production. So things like iron. That's why you want to look at your iron panel alongside, the thyroid. Things like selenium, things like iodine. These nutrients are, I don't want to say they're harder to come by. I would just say they're not like your average, at least to my understanding. And what I see is like they're not something that you're going to have like on the regular. And, this all ties into absorption too. Is your body absorbing the nutrients well where it's able to take advantage of them and then use them most productively to obviously help with thyroid production and thyroid conversion. And then the liver, as mentioned, 60% of thyroid hormone conversion happens in the liver. So if we're not taking care of our liver, what do we expect is going to happen? So these are just some of the most common things that are a part of this puzzle. Now, I also want to mention gluten. Now, gluten is, I know it's one of those things, it's a hot topic in our world. But let me just put this out there. If you are someone who is suspicious of thyroid issues, if you're someone who is diagnosed hypothyroid or Hashimoto's, gluten is a must removal from your diet. I'm sorry to tell you this, but it actually could be incredibly life-changing for you. So I would suggest experimenting at the very least and seeing how it goes. The reason being is there's something called molecular mimicry. And molecular mimicry is essentially what it sounds like, where the composition of gluten, or rather the molecular structure of gliadin, which is the protein part of gluten, it resembles the structure of your thyroid gland. So, what this means is if you're having gluten and you're incorporating gluten into your diet, and your body is actively attacking the thyroid, what can happen is the body can then attack gliadin, but it might also mistake the thyroid for gliadin and go after the thyroid as well. So not only is that obviously going to create inflammation just based on the fact that the immune system is mobilizing an attack on gliadin, but also it's going to possibly put you in a space where the body then also goes after your thyroid tissue just based on its molecular structure. So what does this mean? It means that we need to remove gluten and we need to be hard stop 100% gluten free. And that's a hard pill for people to swallow, but I say to these people, these clients of mine, this is one of those things that, like, yeah, you can remove gluten to address the gut, which also important piece to this puzzle. You're going to have, greater likelihood of leaky gut if you are actively consuming gluten. There's tons of research to support the role that gluten plays on our gut lining, and having a leaky gut is one of the criteria to develop autoimmune. So it's just across the board a good uh a good first step, we'll call it. But when it comes to the thyroid, this is something that I emphasize so wholeheartedly because of how transformational it can be on the body to, especially when it comes to the thyroid, to remove gluten, but also because of what's actually happening, underneath the surface that makes total sense and can actually be really life-changing for so many people. So, I want to dive into why I think I'm trying to decide, like, what do I wanna cover in our remaining 10 or so minutes that is going to be most useful for you? Personally, I think that really kind of uncovering why there's so much, so much under recognizing or under recognition of thyroid dysfunction. I wanna be sure I kind of shed light on that because I do think that there's a lot of that going on. And this is not me trying to diagnose you because obviously I cannot do that. But what I am trying to do is just empower you in the sense of any of the symptoms I listed before with regard to hypothyroidism, where it's that underactivity. I mean, first and foremost, I think all women should be testing a full comprehensive thyroid panel, especially as we get older. We are more prone post-menopause, moving through perimenopause, into menopause, post-menopause. We are more prone to thyroid dysfunction. And so that I think is also something huge to consider is, there's a lot of of poor detection of these issues or lack of education of these issues. And I think it's happening earlier and earlier too. It's not just about, once you get into your 40s and 50s and 60s, it's why is this not diagnosed in our 20s and 30s? And a lot can be done. A lot can be done. That's also something I want you to take away is the acknowledgement that there's so much that can be done and I just feel like we're handling it so poorly or we're just not even identifying it. So if it's not being identified, it's not being acknowledged, we are going to trust the doctors and we're going to trust that they know what they're saying and that all my labs are normal and everything's fine. And then people are off on their way. People, as in women, are off on their way feeling unwell and not getting the help that they need and possibly letting more time go by where something is happening to our thyroid and we're not being proactive about it. We're not doing anything about it and then matters just get worse. So, what I want you to move forward with taking away from this episode is focusing on getting labs drawn. And if you are not able to get labs drawn by your provider, please let me know. I'm happy to order them for you because that is something that I want always to be an option for you if you feel like you're at your wits' end and you're just not being listened to or you're not getting the support that you need and you're suspicious of this as an issue. But like I said, this is something that I think to we all need to run as women every year as an annual check-in beyond the TSH marker, what's going on with my thyroid. So here are the markers I am going to empower you to request. First and foremost, TSH, as mentioned, that is something that's routinely drawn. Unfortunately, though, TSH is not going to give us much insight into the amount of hormone that is available for the cells to use. So it's kind of confusing, right? Because, okay, well, you can show me your TSH and that's great, but if I don't know how much hormone is available for my cells to use, then why does that matter? And even further, I mean, being on prescription medications. If you're on levothyroxine, you should see normal thyroid values you know, because you're being medicated to meet the need of the thyroid. If there's still if there is still abnormality in your markers, then something's not right here. Something's not functioning right because you shouldn't be medicated on something and still see that your TSH is through the roof. That's just doesn't make any sense. So, your TSH range preferably, optimally, by functional standards, should be between 1.5 and 3. Some say 1 to 2, some say 1.5 to 2.5, but all within that range. Now, conventionally, per our healthcare, you can be all the way up to 4.5 or 5 before it's flagged as being abnormal. And I think this is a really important point because you can be at 3, 3.5, 3.8, 4, 4, 4.2, 4.3, you can see it start to climb and never be flagged, yet my brain is flagged something the alarm is getting louder, right? The brain is sounding the alarm louder to signal to the thyroid that thyroid hormone is necessary here. So, why is that so? So if you see your TSH, I would encourage you, especially because this is something you're commonly going to see, run, standard, which is great. At least we get something, right? If you see it's above 3, even above 2.5, right? Like that 1 to 1.5, 2, and you're able to maybe track some trends, I would encourage you to consider that, okay? Because that's speaking to something possibly present that might not be formally recognized by our endocrinology, but still signals that something could be off, that the alarm is getting louder. Okay. When TSH is low, as I mentioned, it's very commonly excess stress. So this will not necessarily be something that you measure through blood work. Some doctors are measuring cortisol. I don't see the need for that. I think it's better to measure cortisol through urine or saliva and then look at it throughout the course of the day. But you can just deduct that there probably is some level of chronic stress going on. Um, that's, I would say, probably the most common. There could be a pituitary issue. There could be other issues as well. I don't want to say, oh, that's definitely what that is, but it's obviously very common. And then with TSH being high, this can show as a underactive thyroid situation or Hashimoto's. So that's really important that we're also then screening for that as well. Then you want to look at your free T4, which is probably the second most common marker that is measured. So your free T4 should be between 1 to 1.6. I say this as a functional range, as an optimal range suggestion, but every person's going to be different in terms of where they feel best. This is something that's really important too, that every person is so different in terms of when they feel best. And so sometimes that means they're at a 1, sometimes that means they're at a 1.6. It all just kind of determines based on the person. Once you familiarize yourself with your thyroid, you'll be able, especially if you're someone who is diagnosed, and you're medicated, you probably know, at what point the dose of T4, if you're on T4, feels best for you. And that's the case for every person, right? So you kind of have to find what feels best. But free T4, sometimes they'll measure total T4. Personally, I think the more data, the better. But I'd say free T4 is probably going to be the most useful. When free T4 is low, this can mean hypothyroid. This can mean nutrient need. All right. If there's a decreased production of T4, if the body is not producing T4 well enough, this could mean it needs zinc. This could mean it needs iron. It could mean iodine. It could mean a lot of different things. And so that's really important that you're correlating this, or you're working with someone who can correlate it with other markers to kind of determine the whole picture. If your free T4 is high, this can sometimes be due to medication. Maybe you're over medicated with T4. This could also be hyperthyroidism. I would say most commonly though, with hypothyroidism, you're going to see lower or trending low free T4. Then you're also going to want to ask for free T3. Preferable range, optimal range for free T3 is 3 to 3.5. This is the one that doctors are not measuring. Okay. I had my client most recently. She's probably listening. We had her measure for the first time TSH, free T4, free T3, reverse T3. I'll talk about reverse T3. And her free T3 was trending lower. So that immediately signaled to me that there may be needs for some support there. Just as a disclaimer, you can be medicated with T3. So if you decided you want to prompt that conversation, broach that conversation with your doctor about, hey, I'd love to talk about possibly medicating with free T3. That's totally your call, obviously under the guidance of a medical provider, under the guidance of a medical professional, having that conversation with the prescriber and, understanding what that means, what that looks like, and doing it obviously with the data to support it. But I think too, if it's a conversion issue where there's adequate T4 and not enough T3, it's also about how can I support the body better with the nutrients, with supporting the liver, with whatever the case is, so the body can convert the way that it's meant to. The body knows what it needs to do. The body knows what to do. You just have to give it the tools and the resources in order to do that. So in order for us to clearly see the whole picture, TSH, free T3, and free T4. Then we want to also look at reverse T3. Now, reverse T3 is an inactive form of thyroid hormone. Okay, so T4, inactive, T3, active. Most reverse T3 is produced from the conversion of T4 in the peripheral tissues. Imagine that the reverse T3 is the brake that slows down ATP cellular production. So if we're looking at free T3, that is what we consider the accelerator. That's what gets the body to go. In comparison to reverse T3, which is the brake. And what we see typically is during acute emotional, psychological, physiological stress, the body's going to convert T4 into reverse T3 as a means of conserving energy to heal and repair. So this is huge, okay? Because if we're seeing that the body is taking that T4 and it's converting it to reverse T3 instead of free T3, that's going to create a lot of dysfunction. So that is something that I saw with this particular client that I'm referring to. Preferable range for reverse T3 is 10 to 20. Now, this is not something that's measured, okay? This is not by standard healthcare, this is not measured. Her reverse T3 was at a 29. So my gathering was the body was taking that T4 that was being provided to her via medication over many, many years and likely sending that T4 mostly to her reverse T3 due to, as mentioned, acute emotional, psychological, physiological stress. And so that impairment is huge because why are we not measuring for that? Why would we not measure if the body has the capability of diverting that T4 to production of reverse T3? Why would we not look at reverse T3 as well? That's what I don't understand. So, reverse T3, free T3, free T4, TSH. Write this down. Okay? Write it down, write it down, write it down. Next, and lastly, TPO and thyroglobulin antibodies. Measure your antibodies. This is going to help determine autoimmune activity. And it's so frustrating because it really makes such it makes such a difference by understanding one versus the other. So this is going to be the lineup. Now, TPO, tell you a little bit about TPO. This is thyroid peroxidase. It's an enzyme, anything with ASE at the end, peroxidase, lipase, amylase, protease, beta glucuronidase. You're probably like, what the heck, Emily? Well, those are all enzymes. Enzymes. It's an enzyme inside the cells of the thyroid that attaches iodine to tyrosine. And the presence of TPO antibodies in your blood suggests that the cause of thyroid disease is an autoimmune disorder. So this is huge. Any presence of antibodies can suggest the latter. Now, thyroglobulin antibodies, these are immune cells that attack the thyroglobulin protein in the thyroid. So any presence of thyroglobulin antibodies in your blood suggests that the cause of thyroid disease is an autoimmune disorder. This is something that is murky territory, number one, because they're not being measured, and number two, most labs are going to allow up to, say, 35 or up to 28 or something when it comes to some of these markers. For TPO, the TPO preferable range is 0 to 6.8, and the thyroglobulin antibodies is 0 to 0.9. So it's a very narrow window for both of these. So this is what we're working with. TSH, free T3, free T4, reverse T3. TPO, thyroglobulin. Now, before we wrap up, because I completely forgot I wanted to mention this. When you are looking at your lipid panel, lipids meaning cholesterol, HDL, LDL, triglycerides, all of that. When you're looking at your iron panel, ferritin, iron, TIBC, both of which should be measured, okay? Lipid panel definitely is something that's measured regularly. Iron panel, not always, okay? You want to look at those in light of the thyroid. Okay, so this is huge. I mean, I didn't even I truthfully don't even feel like I scratched the surface when it comes to the thyroid here. I just wanted to kind of say what was on my mind about this. But the thyroid has a direct impact on, progesterone and estrogen and our sex hormones. There's a direct impact um on the lipids. The thyroid plays a huge role in lipid regulation in the blood. So usually what you're going to find in someone who's dealing with Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism is elevated cholesterol. There's usually some level of lipid dysregulation. What are we going to do in our healthcare? Well, cardiology is going to say, here's a statin. You need to be on a statin. No one's going to look at the thyroid. Why would they do that? They're not going to look at that because that's not their scope, right? That's not their wheelhouse. Iron. Iron is huge. Low iron usually speaks to, I mean, not always, but there's a lot of, I mean, obviously, if you're not consuming iron-rich foods, that's big, but it's usually an absorption issue. When it comes to women especially, iron issues are very common. If we don't have enough iron, there can't be conversion of T4 to T3. And then not to mention, if there's an absorption issue with iron, who's to say there's not also an absorption issue with these other nutrients like selenium and zinc? If there's a stomach acid issue, then are we going to be able to break down protein well enough? Tyrosine, an important amino acid necessary to produce thyroid hormone. If we don't have enough stomach acid to break down protein optimally and there's protein maldigestion going on, how is that going to show up in thyroid hormone production? I mean, do you hear this? You hear how complex this can be? So I want to just be very, very clear on there's so much more to the puzzle, not only in terms of specific thyroid markers that are not being measured, and then also looking at other lab data to help to compile your greatest understanding of your specific needs. Because ultimately that's what's most important. I could tell you all day long about all this information, but it's really what's happening with you and your body that's going to matter most to you. So here we are coming up onto an hour, and you might think, Emily, thyroid? Oh my gosh. Okay, maybe I am still in a drought. No, you might be thinking, Emily, a drought? Really? You're in a drought? Because it sounds like you couldn't stop talking for almost 60 minutes. Yeah, well, you know what? When you get me going about something that matters, I tend to have a hard time holding back. So here's what I'm going to leave you with. Do your research. Dig deeper. Don't stop until you get what you need. Let me know if you have questions. Reach out. I'm happy to guide you, give you thoughts, give you feedback, give you insights. I just think that this is such a missing part of our healthcare, alongside so many other areas, which I've shed light on and I talked about. But this one specifically is just really, really missing the mark. Like we're just not in a good place with this. So, and when endocrinologists are telling my clients they will not be ordering labs to look at their thyroid comprehensive when that is literally their job, I get angry about that. I get really frustrated about that, because what do you mean? What do you literally mean? I cannot understand that. I truly cannot. So that's all I'm going to say on that. I'm going to leave on that note. And if you need anything, let me know. I'm here for that. But thank you so much for listening. Here's to many more episodes, drought-free, we can hope. And I hope that you'll join us next time at the table. And in the meantime, be well.